I'm Jimmy Shuker alongside Albert Chalmers, and this is Radiant Light, a spiritual discussion podcast, episode 8, our Mount Rushmore of Spirituality. This is going to be a really fun episode. Today, Albert and I are going to talk you guys through our 4 favourite spiritual characters and why they make it onto our Mount Rushmore. A little spoiler alert though, if you've been following our podcast series up until this point, you probably can figure out who our favourite 4 characters are. Let's get straight into it then. The first character on our Mount Rushmore of Spirituality, Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha.
Yeah, we missed the drum roll, but
yeah, it would be really cool if we could have that as a sound effect.
All right, show notes. But I guess it's kind of obvious, like you said, because we did the order of 4 Noble Truths was the first of the Mount Rushmore episodes, so to speak.
Yeah, we spoke about the Buddha's 4 Noble Truths, where Buddha basically explained to us that life is full of suffering. We suffer because of our cravings. There is a way out of this suffering, and ultimately it's through following the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, the middle way. And then we did a whole new episode about the middle way. Albert, what do you take from the Buddha's teachings?
I guess as like kind of a recap, just accepting that the experience of life is full of suffering is kind of step 1, which makes it an appropriate choice for where we placed Buddha on this Mount Rushmore. It's just a prerequisite, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that acceptance comes before the rest of what takes place during this whole process, this whole journey, or like the Zen path or any kind of spiritual path. It could be full of suffering, right? And it's just like, if you're not willing to accept it, just get off the path, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd say there's suffering whether you're on the spiritual path or whether you're not, you know. Sorry to get so deep so quickly, but Buddha has had me realizing more and more that we're all going to die, me included. These realizations are something you've got to live with. Bad things are constantly going to happen. And the middle path gives you I don't know if it's kind of like a coping mechanism or a realization, an understanding that life's not going to be all rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah, I guess like a coping mechanism is kind of... I feel like coping is something you do while you're trying to figure out how to transform it, but then the middle way is actually transforming it. It's a step further. It's like not only are you accepting it, but you're doing something with it and turning it into something that couldn't exist without it. So without the suffering as a baseline, we would never be able to transform it into the beautiful things that life consists of, so to speak. It's like once you realize it on that level, you wouldn't want to live without suffering, because it's what you use to get going. It's what pushes you and drives you and pushes you in a direction. And then what you do with that suffering is up to you. You could let it control you, or you could try and control it, or you could transcend it, or you could transform it, or you know what I mean? But it is important. I don't want to live in a world without suffering. And I think before this episode, I was ranting a little bit about how we've tried to remove suffering from society. And I think that that's the worst thing we've done as a human species.
Yeah, you was talking about a bit of a trend in society of parents overprotecting their children. You see a lot of that now?
I don't know if that's the cause of it or if that's a symptom of it, but it's like, protecting speech. And I don't think people should. It's like right speech is one of the Four Noble, it's one of the Eightfold Path, right? But
yeah, correct.
Right speech is important, but at the same time, if you're so weak mentally that everything everyone says will just like deplete you or destroy your state of peace in your mind, then you're not prepared to live life. You're not adequately equipped to deal with the daily occurrences and the suffering that goes along with it, because everyone's trying to put their suffering somewhere else. They're trying to take it off their shoulders and put it on, well, potentially you. If you walk into the room, it could be you who gets their baggage and their bullshit. So you need a bulletproof mindset. And if you don't deal with your own suffering, then you're not prepared to deal with any kind of suffering. And then, just trying to remove it from society in a kind of systematic way, it just shows such a lack of understanding of Tao and yin yang and all this stuff that we'll get into later. But
you mentioned as well before the show, there's countries and societies in the world where if you don't get out of bed and go to work that day, that's it, you're going to starve to death. And in our culture, we've almost got too much of a security blanket that it's kind of like we're not suffering enough in a way. It's too easy to stay in bed and be lazy, so to speak.
Yeah, but I mean, we talked about this once before. I think that one hit the cutting room floor. But when it's like talking about, do people suffer enough? I don't wish suffering on anybody, is the first thing I have to say. But for myself, and I can only control my own self, but I try to put a level of quote unquote suffering on me. It's like a pressure that I put on myself to get better and to improve. And it makes me healthier. It makes me stronger mentally and physically. And I think that the symptoms of people with depression and anxiety and stuff, it's because they're not experiencing the reality of the harshness of life.
Right. Gotcha.
And I don't wish that upon them.
Yeah.
But if you're not feeling that, it's actually going to hurt you in the long run, because you don't know what's real. You have this weird existential disconnect from reality. If you're not getting, the wind slammed in your face, if you're not getting, bumps and bruises along the path, then I don't know what path you're on, but it's probably in your head. It's like an illusion. And Buddha was very eager to wake us up from the illusion of, the sensory pleasures of life, the aesthetic way of life, and all these failed kind of pre-existing ways of dealing with suffering that predated his time and still exist to this day.
Yeah, he certainly made me more aware of it, actually. Okay, just to dial this whole thing back a bit, because we just got really, really deep really quickly, but let's turn it down a couple of notches here. That you just mentioned putting suffering on yourself. So on a much smaller scale, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, you know me, I love traveling so much. I'm always putting myself on some pretty optimistic travel goals year in, year out. It was Peru last year, it's Barcelona this year. And yeah, just about a week or so ago, booked some flights, made some arrangements, booked hotels for this Barcelona trip. And straight away, it's like I've put a little bit too much on that credit card than what I'd really feel comfortable with. And the day after, instead of getting that buzz of like, oh yeah, the trip's going to happen, I'm working towards that goal I wanted, I can feel like that sense of pain inside me, like, oh, you've really put some financial pressure on yourself now. And thanks to Buddha, I was like, well, this is it, you are literally suffering because of your desires. You desired this trip, you must do it no matter what, quote unquote. And now I'm suffering for it. So I guess it's nice that Buddha's kind of brought this awareness to the front of my mind.
But would it like change your decision? I don't think
It makes me more mindful of my decision.
Yeah, exactly. At least you're doing something you want to do, and
seeing the positive in the suffering. Yeah, like maybe once upon a time I might have got all stressed out because I've put extra money on my credit card and getting myself all beat up and in knots about it. But now I'm aware, thanks to Buddha, that okay, yeah, I'm feeling a bit of physical pain because of this, but like it's worth it. You know, if I wasn't suffering in this way, I would. Diamonds form under pressure. If I wasn't suffering in this way, I'd had nothing to transform into the positive, amazing trip that, God willing, it will be.
yeah, you're buying an experience instead of a possession or something like.
Yeah. And Buddha is not about buying possessions. He's probably not about buying experiences either, actually. But it's a very westernized view on Buddha's message, right?
Well, you take what you can from it, I guess. You take something totally different from it than I do, so it's like anyone can find their own way of using the tools to their advantage. I don't think I could ever be the one to claim that the way I choose to deal with that information is the best and only way. That's just...
What do you think some of the clearest ways that you and I like interpret this message differently then? Like where do we differ on Buddhism and what we've learned?
For me, it's like I've latched onto the martial arts component of Zen. It's like my obsession, I guess. And along with that and like other things, the Zen painters, the Zen poets, the Zen music, like those things that appeal to me, they're not like in the Buddha's message outright, I would say. They're just like a consequence of them.
You say that, but I feel it's very Buddhist to not look to the future with anxiety, not look back on the past feeling depressed, but enjoy the present moment. I'm sure that's a huge message within Buddhism, that these things that you're talking about, the martial arts and your day-to-day activities, if you're truly in the moment and in the now, it becomes like a meditative experience, so to speak.
Yeah. But I would say of all the practicing Buddhists in the world, a very small percentage of them are martial artists. And likewise, of the martial artists in the world, it's only a small fraction of them which are Buddhist. So it's like, it's just a niche within a niche, so to speak. But that's what keeps me every morning fresh with this Zen stuff. And it's just like, I feel like I'm finally just getting past the surface level, quote unquote. But if that's the goal, is to get to that deeper state of mind, then you just have to find what works for you to get there. And I mean, Zazen and sitting meditation is one way in. It might be overemphasized in some schools of Zen, in the Japanese schools and whatnot, but
we talked about what a powerful tool meditation has been for both of us in our spiritual journeys, right? And Buddha, his whole thing where he became enlightened, he did it all through meditation, right?
Yeah, but like sitting meditation to me is just one of many, many, many forms of meditation. And I don't put it on a pedestal in that I don't say it's the best or the only way to experience a meditative state of mind, or nirvana, or satori, or samadhi, or the mushin, or any of these words that we use to label enlightenment or like a clear state of mind. I think Zhuangzi said it best, that you could find that in just sitting by a stream and watching the water, or you could find it while you're in a battle, or you can find it anywhere.
Find it doing the gardening.
Yeah, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. But I think gardening is extremely therapeutic. But you're actually not just sitting; you're in reality, but you're meditating at the same time. So I think Buddha he's that seated figure. You know, we see him always seated in that position, the full lotus posture, doing a kind of mudra with his hands. And we see that and we think, this is meditation. This is what it is. But that's a figure, like a stone figure or a bronze figure or whatever. It's like a statue. But like, you're not that. You're a living human being. So you have to find the meditative, mindful way in whatever you're doing, which is the trick and the hard part. You know, it's easy. I find sitting meditation is probably a great place to start because you aren't getting these distractions, sensory distractions or whatever. But like,
isn't there an Alan Watts quote where it says that the art of life is to be fully indoctrinated in the thing that you're doing in this present moment?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're getting at with these meditations that aren't sitting meditations.
Yeah, I think he was kind of the one that pushed me in that direction to be like, well, you know, I'm meditating whilst I'm walking. It's not necessarily just when I'm sitting. I think that he came across people who said he wasn't really teaching Zen because he wasn't emphasizing Zazen. So,
and when you're in that meditative state as you're walking, for example, and your ego's not playing back old scenarios over and over again, I find you're much more likely to notice these little things around you. Like, I guess it sounds a little bit corny, but you know, the birds in the trees, the little old lady across the road doing her shopping, you know, you're more present with it all. You kind of catch the beauty of life. Your life's not flying by you and you're kind of missing it all, you know, wasted on old corrupt scenarios.
yeah, that's part of that illusion part that you have to break free from that. Because it's thoughts. The thought mind in Buddhism is not the same as the heart mind or the essence mind. The essence mind is kind of just like awareness itself. It's a much purer form of consciousness that we're supposed to awaken into. Not like these dream scenario, like, I'm thinking about my dream future and all this stuff. Like, this is like a trap. I think that's part of the matrix that people got fooled into. And I hate to say that. I'm into visualization and manifesting things.
Yeah.
But like aware of what that is. That's part of like everyone's process, but it's not the meaning of life or something like that. That's not what it is.
It's so hard, isn't it? Because as you're saying that, I'm immediately thinking about what I just said not 5 minutes ago about the Barcelona trip. When I'm striving to make that Barcelona trip happen, or whatever the next one may be, how much is that taking me out of the present moment and not following Buddha's message, you know?
It's not for me to judge that. It's more just, are you going to be in Barcelona when you go to Barcelona, or are you going to be in your head thinking about the next trip or the last thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've learned that lesson. You've got to be in that thing that you're doing right
so
then. Yeah.
If you officially achieve that dream scenario, enjoy that scenario in that moment and don't think about the next thing or whatever. Like, if your whole itinerary is predetermined, you might miss some cool... this might be better for the next character.
Well, let's move on to that next character now. The next character on our Mount Rushmore is Lao-tzu. Albert, where should we start with Lao-tzu?
Whew. Lao-tzu. Well...
Possibly your favourite character on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, in a sense, I don't want to pick a favorite, but it's like my vibe is kind of Lao-tzu vibes, so to speak. But I feel like, first of all, I covered almost everything I wanted to talk about in the first episode. So if you haven't heard that, maybe go back and listen to that one.
Yeah,
But
that was episode 4, The Way of Water,
yeah,
where we talked about Taoism. Obviously, we love the Buddha and Buddhism, which we covered in episodes 2 and 3. And then Taoism mixed with Buddhism gives us Zen Buddhism, our niche, so to speak. And Lao-tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching.
Mm-hmm.
Huge part of Taoism.
He kind of like sparked the spark that lit the flame of Taoism in China, across not even just China, but all over Asia. And I mean, his influence is still felt everywhere to this day. But to say about Lao-tzu, I think just my philosophy of life, it's kind of stemmed out of treating life as a dance, because in a dance there's a beginning, a middle, an end, and several steps and whatnot, but then there's also the improvisational aspect of it. So like, you don't dance just to get to the end of the dance as quickly as possible. What you do is you bridge the different moves with your own flavor and your own personality and your own style and your own rhythm and your own I guess on the street we would call it like you got your swag, you know what I mean? You have to add your swag. Yeah. For me, life is about adding my own swag into it. And to me, everything in life is about this idea of, I might die one day, but I'm going to dance my dance till the end. Like, I'm not going to stress about where people tell me where I should step, and people coming up to me and saying, you're not supposed to dance over here, or you're not supposed to dance like that. And I've had people my whole life trying to tell me how to dance, not just metaphorically, but literally, like, you don't dance like that, and this is not how you dance. And
yeah, you like to go with what feels right in that moment, yeah? What feels more natural to you in the situation.
Yeah, I feel like I have a gift in that way. It's like I can vibe that way, and not everybody can. So, some people, they just dance like robotically.
Yeah, they feel a bit awkward.
Yeah, and then there's other people who master a specific dance, and they know the movements so perfectly. But, like, I've been more into, like, Tai Chi type flowing movements instead of, like, these hard karate kata movements. Like, you and I both did karate when we were young.
Yeah.
And we kind of got a little bit of insight into this, like, kata, these forms, right? And you have
sequence of moves, yeah.
Yeah, you have to do them in a specific way, in a specific order. And that wasn't what drew me to karate. It was more like the kumite, like live sparring aspect. What happens in a live scenario when nobody knows, there's no script. That's what I love.
Yeah, like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a game plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or in language learning, we say, yeah, everybody's got a game plan until they have a conversation with a local. And I think what we're getting at is like a huge part of Lao-tzu's message about his whole thing, the Tao. You can't really describe it, but it's just that irresistible force, the way that things are. You're never going to fully control it. So the best thing to do is just surrender to it. Surrender to the moment and what's going on. Am I butchering this, or am I on the right track, Albert? You tell me. Yeah,
I think that's a big part of it. Is when you say surrender, you mean wu wei. Wu wei, it's non-action or non-resistance. It's to not force something. But there's part of surrender which is like just like let everything happen to you. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more like you make your thing happen, but be prepared to adapt in the moment. Like, travel's your thing. So, like, in a travel scenario, if you have something planned for that day, but something better happens, you might be able to just go with that flow, right?
Many well-traveled people will say, don't have this fixed itinerary. You got to be open to the magic of what's going to be out there. You know, you step foot in a new city that you've never been to before. There's going to be so many magical experiences and untapped areas that you haven't got a clue about, that's not even in the guidebook, that you might just stumble upon.
If
And
you're open to that.
yeah, if you're open to it. Yeah, if you're thinking in this Taoist way, you know, the way Lao-tzu spoke about, then yeah, you're open to the magic of what the universe could have in store for you.
Well, it's kind of like, for me, the ultimate dance partner is the Tao itself. So
course,
like, I make plans, I make moves, I set things in motion, but then I'm always putting my ear back to the ground to listen to, you know, okay, what's the vibration here, what's the vibration there. I know it sounds really like, oh my god, this guy just vibrations and stuff. Like, I know how cliche it sounds, but that's why we talk like this. It's because of Lao-tzu.
But it's great though, because Lao-tzu and what we've learned about his message, I mean, I'll speak for myself here, but I feel like Taoism has just made me so much more flexible in my thinking, because you and I both know, of the two of us, I was kind of like the opposite of the Taoist. You know, I liked everything structured and planned out and everything, and if anything, I probably needed to loosen up a little bit. So to give you a great example to do with this podcast, actually, when we recorded the Confucianist episode with Sean, I had this whole list of questions that I wanted to ask him. And to be fair, in hindsight, they were really basic questions about Confucius. And before I could even get to them, Sean was just straight in with a much more interesting topic. I think he was talking about, you know, the historical setting that his translation of the book, of Confucius's book, was written in. And I was like, wow, he's gone straight in a totally different direction to what I was expecting. But, you know, this is magic. Yeah. He's getting me to level up. The whole plan that I had, he's taken this in a new direction that's in many ways better than what I had in mind. And if I hadn't learned a little bit about Taoism and followed Lao-tzu's message, I might have been like, no, we can't talk about that. Let's bring it back to this. And
yeah, you would have smothered it, and then it would have lost any fun. And then, you know, once that vibe changes, it's like
it kind of like it would have dragged everybody down.
Yeah,
you know, and really, and maybe Sean might have been sitting there thinking, oh my word, like, what are these basic questions that he's, you know, maybe I would have lost all credibility. I don't know, but there was a moment in that conversation with Sean where I thought to myself, hold on a minute, should I just throw my notebook out the window here and go full on Taoist with this and just forget everything? But I didn't do that. I kind of dropped in some of the questions, some of the better questions that we had prepared. And, you know, maybe this is a story for a future episode when we do Zen Diaries again, but I ended up with that kind of merge of Confucianism, the questions that I had planned, mixed with the Taoism magic of the moment, so to speak.
Well, they go hand in hand, which is kind of like foreshadowing, right? Like, they play into each other and off each other and whatnot. But like, my approach to the podcast in general is, before we do it, I just kind of like let go of any, we do a meditation and I just let go of any prepared ideas about what we're going to speak about, because I know that in the moment my brain is going to come up with the things I'm supposed to say. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And so all the beautiful metaphors, I don't know if they're specifically in the Tao Te Ching, but some things, like if you're going to make a fire, you can't smother it. You got to give it air and all that. You got to give it fuel. Like the Taoists, they love the 5 forms, they call it. It's like the 5 phases. It's not the 5 elements, because they're always in flux, which is just like the yin yang, right? It's wood, air, water, metal, and fire. Those are the 5 phases. So, you burn a piece of wood, it becomes smoke, it goes into the air, it fluxes into a cloud and becomes water, and so on and so forth.
Is this an expression of the Tao?
Yeah, and we're just that. And you just have to let that process flow and be at peace with that. And so everything you do is an expression of that. And once you're dancing with the Tao, you just never want to stop. It's so much fun. Life becomes fun again.
Absolutely, yeah. And going back to the travel example, I believe it was Lao-tzu who said, a good traveller has no fixed plan and is not intent on arriving.
Mm-hmm. That's a solid one for sure. And that's a Lao-tzu quote that probably everybody's heard but never knew. That was actually a Lao-tzu quote, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the third character on our Mount Rushmore of spirituality is Confucius. Albert, where would you like to start with Confucius?
Well, I think we just kind of have to mention that Confucius and Lao-tzu were both contemporaries and they met, right? So they're both from different provinces during the spring and autumn period, but they did actually come across each other's paths along the way. And their philosophies kind of opposed one another in a sense, but they complemented each other in another sense. So it's...
The main thing that I knew about Confucianism going into the episode that we recorded about it was mainly just about how everything, society should be structured and things should be organized, and it was a little bit black and white, so to speak. But the really pleasant things that I felt I discovered about Confucius's message was the emphasis that he puts on rituals. He speaks quite a lot of how he values, like the family gatherings, the birthdays. I guess as a Western example, it would be, say, Christmas time. And he also puts a lot of emphasis on, the respect to people in more senior positions than we are, like an employee to employer relationship.
Yeah.
Kind of like beautiful messages in there in a way.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I could see why you would... There is definitely like a value towards what he's saying.
Surely a family ritual. Let's take that one firstly. If we look at the family ritual, like birthdays and Christmas times, like I think there's a story where one of the messengers, I'm probably butchering this, one of the messengers to Confucius says, I don't think we should continue the offering of a sheep. And Confucius replied, you value the sheep, I value the ritual, the coming together of the people.
Fair enough. I mean,
there's value in that, right?
What I see is kind of like Confucianism is like the Catholicism of the East, so to speak.
Okay. Tell me more.
It's like it serves its purpose on like political levels, government levels, education level. It's in terms of like everything that's occurring in even the economy, everything. Like it forces people to have a place in society, right? Where I disagree with it, it's more like in Taoism, yin and yang are female and male, and one isn't superior to the other. They're both essential components of the same sphere, right? Like it's a yin yang. It's not a yin versus a yang or a yin and a yang. It's a yin yang. It's one thing. There's a male and a female. Whereas Confucius, he really emphasized the sort of place of women being lower than men in the whole hierarchy.
Really?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, it was Christianity that actually led to them stopping with the foot binding ceremony and stuff like that.
Wow.
So there's like those archaic things of Confucianism that I think we're better off without. But in a more holistic kind of Taoist version of it where it became Zen and they complement each other, I'm okay with those. I like those things, the rituals and things in that context where I can sort of contemplate life on my own. I don't have to find out where I fit in the great scheme of society because I'm already worried about fitting into the universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Like I found my wholeness in the universe. I don't really care where I am in the whole social hierarchy. That's just me though. I mean, that's what gets people up in the morning to go like pursue a career and stuff.
Well, yeah, for example, when we asked Sean in the interview about his favourite parts of Confucianism, he spoke about the respect that teachers received. Yeah, he saw that as a really positive thing. They were one of the most respected roles in society.
Of course. As they should be.
Do you have a favourite aspect of Confucianism? Like, what would you say is like the most...
My answer will kind of be a little bit left field for you, but so there's this anime I love.
That's what we're all about here on the Radiant Light podcast.
Well, if you noticed on the episode of Confucianism, in the background there's a T-shirt with a Naruto T-shirt, right? Like there's a Naruto picture on the T-shirt. Sorry. But the reason I wanted to have that is because I found out that Naruto, the show, was based on Confucianism.
Okay.
The philosophy of Confucius, and Japan itself is heavily influenced by Confucianism. Of course, they have Shinto and Zen and other forms of Buddhism and Taoism and things, but Confucianism is kind of what led to their society today, how it's run, how it's organized, and for better or worse. I love Japan. I love Japan. Like, it's just I don't know that I could easily just like slip into a Japanese society and find my way in the hierarchy of it. I'm more interested in going there on my own terms and just kind of like being Taoist within that environment. But I respect and appreciate that Confucianism brought Japan to such a height that we see them at, like economically and in rituals.
The overall evolution, right?
Yeah, they have this beautiful rituals. They have these disciplines. They have such a work ethic. They have such a respect. And that I love that. And that I learned about through anime and other things about Japan, and just think, wow, like I really wish we had more of that in the West. And I wish not just the West, it's like Japan exclusively figured it out in a way where they use Confucianism and capitalism and they made it work in a way that I can just appreciate it. Like I'm in awe of it, to be honest. So that's my answer to where does Confucianism play a role in my life? It's just the appreciation of the country of Japan and just seeing how efficient it is, you know? I'm sure that a lot of emotional baggage gets lost along the way. The shuffle of the hustle and bustle is real, you know? It's just, it's efficient. It's respectful. It's beautiful.
I had no idea that Confucianism was actually seen as a religion and not just a philosophy until we spoke to Sean. So, number one, I was fascinated to find out that it is considered a religion by some people. And then secondly, to follow that up with was when Sean described people visiting Confucianist temples and then Buddhist temples and Taoist temples, you know, in China, right? Yeah, in China on alternative weeks, or just hopping countries around Asia here. that's something we don't really do in the West. Again, I only speak for myself, but it does feel like we mainly stick to a Christian church or a Jewish synagogue. I don't know. Like,
You got to pick your lane, and like you're on a team now, and you got to like defend the integrity of that at the expense of all the other.
A little bit, yeah. It does feel that way, but yeah, and I was just fascinated the way the way Sean pulled the curtain back and was like, oh no, well it's not. Yeah, I guess it's when I say not really like that, it's more Taoist over in China. Pardon the pun. That people can just go from one type of temple to another.
I just think it's just the way the Chinese view the universe and everything. It's so fascinating because it's so different than where I'm from, and that's why I'm continuously looking towards the Chinese ways of the past and just finding that, you could, like, for example, another anime I love, Dragon Ball. It comes from the book The Journey to the West, which is a famous Ming Dynasty novel, one of the first great novels in history, and it blends Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism seamlessly. It's just so Chinese. They just, all three components are there. It goes without saying, it's like I don't know if they take it for granted or not, but to you and me, it's kind of like a mind-blowing thing where we're like, oh really? It's like,
yeah, we didn't see that coming
because we had been sort of in a lane going down our path, and once you do that, you kind of close yourself off. It seems like anything that makes you question is kind of evil in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there is that sort of like an undertone, if you like.
Yeah. Like, to wake up out of the Matrix, it's going to be like a bit of horrifying experience. But once you get past that, you kind of appreciate that it was so simple all along. It's just kind of funny that you didn't see it before until sort of you had the epiphany. Or was it really when Sean said it? That's how, because we've been doing this podcast for a while, and now you're just kind of, I think you're slowly realizing it more and more is what it is, that it's just not what you're accustomed to, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love little moments like that where your mind gets somewhat, I'll not say mind blown, but a light bulb goes off in your head and you're like, oh, it's different. It's like that. That's why I love traveling so much, because you come across these things that you're just not, when you travel, things are different that you didn't really know was a thing, if that makes sense. And yeah, I guess maybe when Sean described it to us, the whole thing just felt a lot more real because you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. He's physically been there. He's talking it through. It's not just hearsay. It's like a first-hand experience. Like, oh yeah, I met XYZ person, and they go to a Taoist temple on one weekend, and then the Confucius one on the next one. I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, it's just different, beautiful but different.
Yeah, I think it's easier for the Chinese to hop around and try different hats and stuff. They're just more used to that.
Ultimately, when we was putting our Mount Rushmore of spirituality together, what would you say is like the key thing that solidifies, Confucius, he's got his place on the Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, because when I had this initial concept, so to give the context here, it's like I'm on vacation in Canada during the summer, just as free as I can be without being like a ghost or something. Just really feeling like unhindered by...
You were vibing.
Yeah, I was just vibing. I was like unhindered by the old baggage, the old hang-ups that I had. Just kind of breaking through to a different level and just saying, really just kind of appreciating that it was Buddha and Jesus and, well, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
And Lao-tzu especially, that had led to this new sort of sense of freedom. And then thinking, well, Mount Rushmore's got 4 faces. And just wasn't really sure who the last one was going to be. But through reading Zhuangzi, I realized that it had to be Confucius, because he was the one that questioned Lao-tzu, and their kind of relationship was important.
Do you think they were kind of like the yin to each other's yang in a way?
Yeah, I would have felt wrong. It would have felt weird without both of them.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, and the fourth and final spiritual character on our Mount Rushmore is our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. Albert, for lack of a better term, I felt that we kind of missed a trick, so to speak, in our Jesus episode. So I was doing a bit of reflecting on this, and I felt that we dove quite deeply into our personal relationships with God. You remember when Daniel spoke about, the wind blowing against his face, and I told my sign from God story. But then we kind of made the assumption that our audience knows for sure who Jesus is and what his message was. And we kind of went really deep into the Bible. So I guess I'd like to just walk it back a little bit, because look, for all I know, we may be attracting listeners in Buddhist parts of the world that don't have a clue who Jesus Christ is. So in layman's terms, who is Jesus Christ, and what do Christians believe?
Who is Jesus Christ? Wow, okay.
Pretend I don't have a clue.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. So there's a place called Israel.
Bethlehem, right?
Bethlehem's in Palestine, technically, but
Okay.
ancient Judea is the name of the Roman part of the Middle East of that time. It's very convoluted, and the Bible is quite long for a reason, but he's the one that came along to fulfill the prophecies of the Jewish people, the Israelites.
Jesus is the person that...
Yeah. The historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth is that he was born the son of Mary and Joseph. Well, he was God and Mary is what Christians believe, but she was already engaged to a man named Joseph, and they had to flee from where they were having the child in Bethlehem into Egypt because of a dream or an angel telling them that the King Herod, the king of Judea, was going to execute the children because he believed in those prophecies and he knew that the Messiah had been born. And so...
And Mary was a virgin, very important part of the story, and she's going to give birth to the Messiah, who is the Son of God, right? God in human form.
Manifest in the flesh, right? And the reason that's important is because human beings are sinners by nature, of having descended from the original human being, Adam, who fell from taking a fruit from the wrong tree, basically, and his wife and he were banished from the Garden of Eden, ever to be plagued by the consequences of this sin, right? And that original sin is kind of our nature, and he's the one that liberated us from all of that sin. It's just the word sin is very important. It's key. And his blood was the way that we were cleansed, because in the Old Testament, the Levites used the blood of a lamb to what do you call it? Spray it on the altar or whatever. Flick it on the altar. I don't know what the...
And the Old Testament is basically everything up until the point where Jesus is born, correct?
Till he dies, technically.
Till he dies, sorry.
But in the books of the Bible, the Gospels are placed at the beginning of the New Testament, and they tell the story of Jesus going back to Adam and going back to his place in the lineage.
Mm-hmm. And focusing this on Jesus now, we talked about his birth. Now the key thing's going to be in his death, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, talk to us about the death of Jesus Christ and what it means and why it's such a fulfillment of prophecies to Christians.
Well, having been a Christian myself and still having a certain, faith or whatever, it's kind of complicated, to be honest.
We've always said we're grounded in our Christian roots.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to say I don't believe this. I don't want to say that I believe it 100% or whatever, but if you're a sinner, it's too late and you need to deal with the sin before you can go to heaven, because heaven cannot have sin. It cannot exist, right?
Heaven's the place where we go when we die, where sin doesn't exist.
Yeah, and to get there, you need to be cleansed of the sin. So some perfect person who never sinned needs to replace you in that sense.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got this right. Tell me if I'm getting it wrong, but the Bible's basically telling us that it's impossible to be sinless, and Jesus, this perfect sinless person, dies on the cross for our sins. He takes our place, and
he paid the price.
Yeah, he paid the ultimate price, and I'm probably butchering this, but those who believe in him will not perish.
Yeah, they'll see an everlasting life. The best way I've heard it described in layman's terms was by a Baptist preacher by the name of Peter S. Ruckman, who's really quite known throughout the King James only movement, and he's a kind of a controversial figure in that ultra conservative Southern American, kind of like, not South American, but like Florida and the South.
Yeah.
But he's kind of a really interesting guy. Maybe save that for a future conversation. But
yeah, we could do a whole episode about that. Yeah,
perhaps. But he said that basically the devil's the prosecution and Jesus is the defense. And what happens is God's at the judge seat, the stool or whatever, and he's saying, all right, you want to go to heaven? Why should I let you in? And then you go, well, I mean, I'm a good person. He goes, no, not good enough. Then Satan says, I've seen him do this. I got evidence he did that and this and all these lists of sins, right? He goes all the way back to your childhood with everything you've done. And then
a long list.
And then Jesus just comes up and there's like a fine. Say there's like a fine now. It's like unpayable fine that you have to pay if you don't want to go to jail. And Jesus just walks up and he goes, I'll take this, I'll handle it, I'll pay for it. He pays it, and you're scot-free. That's what happened, basically. That's the whole scenario of the Jewish cosmology and the Old Testament, everything. It's just that scenario where someone's accusing you, and then someone is your advocate, your defense, so to speak, and he pays the punishment for you so that you won't have to. So it's kind of wrapped up in a nice little bow, and it is a beautiful. I love the gospel in that sense, that it doesn't seek to alleviate you and then give you something negative in replace of it. The problem that I have with the gospel is that it alleviates the responsibility that you yourself have to deal with that karma that you've built up through these actions, but the Bible does say that you will reap what you sow. So karma exists in the Bible as well. You always reap what you sow. You know what I mean? It's just, it gets tricky because, okay, Jesus paid the consequence for my sins, so like I'll do whatever I want and just live like however I want. And no, that's not the message, right? You're supposed to follow in his footsteps now.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've okay, so that I'm understanding this right, if you've understood the message, the only possible response would be, okay, Jesus, I'm going to give you everything that I have. I know that I'm a sinner, but, at least I'm going to try now for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Try to follow in your footsteps. What would, for lack of a better term, a devout Christian point to in the Bible to say, well, this is the evidence, this is the proof that Jesus is the Messiah and that he is God in human form? Were there prophecies earlier in time that Jesus is coming that clearly proved that, yes, he is the one, so to speak?
Okay. So
What would you point to?
how do I answer this? Okay, so there's like the prophecies, and then there's like the salvation thing, right? For me, they're different. It's the prophecies are for the Jews, and the salvation is for everybody. I take the gift of salvation because it's a free gift that makes me feel better. It's like selfish in a way. The prophecies are for that specific race of people that existed at that time, where they were looking for this guy to fulfill prophecies from the prophets, the books in the Bible called the prophets, right? Whereas you and I mean, have you read the prophets?
I mean, I'm sure I've probably heard them at a church preached to me, but I wouldn't say I've sat down and opened it up and read through it and can relay anything back to you. Do you know what I mean?
But is that what you're asking? Like, do you want me to summarize them, or do you want me to just kind of explain why they're relevant? Or because I don't see them as entirely relevant to me personally.
Okay.
But if you were...
Well, if a Christian that did think they was relevant, if you put yourself in the shoes of a Christian that would say, yep, Jesus is the one, he is the Messiah, it was predicted in this point in time that a savior would come down to earth, and then it happened. Like, what would he point to?
I mean, all those prophecies, and then his fulfilling of those prophecies, it's like such an astronomical number, a percentage that it could never happen, and then that it did happen would be like scientific or historical evidence that he is the one. But my argument there is, how do you know this guy even existed to begin with? How do you know that the New Testament is even accurate? How do you even know that it's not all just kind of made up, And that could just end in a never-ending argument, and it just doesn't really matter to me because...
Well, it kind of does carry on in a never-ending argument because you've got...
Well, we're talking about it now.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got your super Christian man full of faith, and then you've got your, I don't know,
but you
atheist.
Just said it, right? Faith.
Yeah.
If you believe it because of all the prophecies, you're not relying on the faith. You're relying on historical evidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So pick your lane, man. Like, do you want to be the I believe the prophecies guy, or do you want to be like the I just believe guy? Because there's benefits and there's pros and cons to both of those lanes. Blind faith isn't kind of my cup of tea, but overanalyzing prophecies just never gets me anywhere either. So
yeah, it would probably drive us pretty crazy, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But I think the message is what's important. The salvation message, I've kind of taken that and interpreted it my own way, and I've just run with that. I chose my own way to deal with the information.
When you say you've interpreted it your own way, was there a special way that you've interpreted Jesus' message then that's kind of solidified his name on your Mount Rushmore and our Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, I could kind of explain that. Well, he was the first one that I encountered in life, right? Because I was raised Christian, and so of all the spiritual figures, he's, the one that I most closely associate with my upbringing and all that.
Yeah, that natural kind of point that you were born into, yeah?
But beyond that, I've kind of reinterpreted that Messiah message in a way that's more modern, because I find like a film like The Matrix or Star Wars, they have this message of, a hero came to rid the universe of evil, and here he is, and we've been waiting the whole time, and finally he showed up. But to me, it's like the part of the Bible where Jesus sends the Holy Spirit, and then you can become a son of God or a child of God. That's what I kind of gravitated to more so recently. Even it's more of a Gnostic message, which could be considered blasphemous, but I'm willing to argue, or not argue, because I think debates, it just further makes you hard in your stance, and it doesn't actually open up any real possibility of change. So I'd rather discuss, like we talk about, these are spiritual discussions. I'm totally open to discuss with Christians about whether a Gnostic interpretation of the Bible, so to speak, is blasphemous or if it's accurate with Scripture. But the thing is, I find those people who are sort of set in their ways aren't equally as open to discuss with me as anything I could possibly say would be considered potentially evil or coming from the mouth of Satan or what. You know what I mean? Like, it gets into that weird territory.
It's a really sensitive subject.
It gets dark in that way. I think it's sad. Because radiant light is about light. It's not about condemning people in that way. I think that's where Satan, so to speak, tricks his people, and even God's people. He tricks them into, well, that guy's a Buddhist. He doesn't know anything about God. I know all the scriptures, and maybe he's just as good as in hell, and he'll never get saved. And these are the dark thoughts that run through the mind of many, many, many Christians. And I think it's sad because they're like cutting themselves off from real connections with God, not just these like group circle jerks. And this is funny. The Gnostics did group circle jerks. I mean that. Wow. And that sounds weird, right? Like, now we're getting into some dark shit, but why is it dark? It's only because Christianity has this dualistic good versus evil dynamic. And we've already kind of cracked that code with yin yang back in the earlier part, right? It's like,
it's the first thing I thought of when you said that dualistic good versus bad. I'm sure we even spoke about this it was either the Buddhist episode or the Taoist episode that I'm paraphrasing here, but you might have said to me that you no longer look at the world through a good versus bad perspective. It's more kind of in harmony with each other. You need one to have the other, or something like that anyway.
I've definitely kind of switched my perspective to being more in line with the Zen worldview, because I think just dualism is an illusion that creates big problems for everybody.
And the yin yang does make sense, doesn't it? What is good if you haven't got bad? One can't coexist without the other. And there are so many examples of that in the universe that we've mentioned so many times. But look, ultimately, I just love the fact that despite that we're kind of stepping into the more Zen Buddhism outlook on the world, we still knew without a doubt, our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ is on the Mount Rushmore, right?
Well, I think it would be a kind of red flag if I turned around one day and just like, nope, not a Christian, he's out, and then I just bashed the whole thing, because it would be too easy to do that anyway, and it would expose me as like a fraud. Like, I'm not really against Christianity in any way. I just want them to elevate on the same it's like inclusivity, I think, is nice. I just think it's beautiful. And I think that we're seeing that trend even within like modern churches and things. There is an inclusivity going on, whether it's out of self-preservation, I don't want to say for a fact that it is that or it isn't that. That's probably a part of it, but whether it's for the right reason or the wrong reason, it has to happen, so let it happen. Inclusivity, and let's just let this new age thing play out, and we're just a part of that experience. And I just want to keep the peace and love vibe. That's what's important. And Jesus was peace and love vibe.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Love thy neighbor. You know?
Yeah, he said all the right things, so there's no criticism there. It's more the religion of Christianity that comes after the fact. It's the arguments once he's gone. Now where do we go from here?
And I truly believe that when you get down to the real core messages of all of these spiritual characters that we've spoken about tonight, they're phrased in slightly different ways, but it all really does boil down to a message of peace and love and treating your neighbour as you would yourself. I think that might have even been a Confucius expression there.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, you know.
It's called the Golden Rule, actually.
Yeah.
It's in every religion. Just Google the Golden Rule and you'll find it. And yeah, it's a good thing we could build upon, for sure.
Okay, so before we wrap things up now, there's one more spiritual character who, Albert, he didn't make it onto our Mount Rushmore, but we've referenced him so many times on our podcasts. It kind of wouldn't feel right to let this episode go by without at least giving this man an honourable mention. Albert, what would you like to say about Alan Watts?
Alan Watts he's a bit of a trickster, if you use the archetype. A man who actually really changed a lot of lives over the years, especially now with the internet and YouTube and stuff. But he's just kind of, if there isn't a place for him on the Mount Rushmore, we could say that he's the guy that helped us build, like physically chisel the stone into the Mount Rushmore. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you
he's
took the
guy,
words right out my mouth.
He gave us that chisel so that we could do that. And you know, he's like a Michelangelo of spirituality or something.
His philosophy's fascinating. You know, we've referenced his books so many times and the things we've learned from him. But we'll do a whole episode about Alan Watts. That's
he's earned it for sure.
Yeah, that's coming up in a future episode. Okay, that appears to be all we have time for on today's episode. Before we finish, we'd just like to say this was our personal Mount Rushmore of spirituality. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the Mount Rushmore, and we'd be really curious to hear what your Mount Rushmore would be and what your 4 favourite spiritual characters are. So please feel free to reach out, send us an email, interact with us. And don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. And you can even follow us on Instagram too. And until next time, good night, God bless, and namaste.